Hello, I'm Denis Pitcher from ResQuest.com, and this presentation is about digitally verifying your COVID-19 status while preserving privacy and choice. So to begin, I'd like to outline 3 example COVID status personas. So someone who has recently got a negative PCR test result, someone who is fully vaccinated, and someone who has a medical exemption from getting a vaccination. Similarly, I'd like to outline 4 example scenarios where COVID-19 can have an impact. So, for example, international travel, going from country to country, and the implications of negative tests or vaccine results. Scenarios such as indoor dining, where there is local community spread or other risks that reduces the ability for people to enjoy a meal indoors. Large events that occur perhaps indoors or outdoors that may need special exemptions and special risk provisions, and tourism activities. So how do we really make sure that there is safety when individuals go on a boat cruise or swimming with the dolphins or scuba diving or other activities? Let's start with the first scenario, international travel. So the real problem here is that we don't govern international acceptance here in Bermuda. So when you consider these various statuses, individuals want to go traveling, each jurisdiction itself is up to determine what it accepts and what it does not. And increasingly, the documentation that you use to prove your COVID status, whether it's a negative test, a vaccination, an exemption, is coming under greater scrutiny. And jurisdictions are globally looking at ways they can better verify the accuracy of this documentation, because there is a lot of fraud occurring that is enabling people to try and skip requirements. So we need a means to make our certificates digitally verifiable. So an individual, based upon their status, can get a certificate. They can present that, and a simple means such as going to a web address like verify.gov.bm can be used to actually view that that certificate is accurate. And this allows an individual from a variety of different potential statuses to have a document that is then signed by the government that is readily verifiable, so that individuals can verify their status. A certificate being the same document that you'd traditionally get, but adding, say, a QR code to it that makes it verifiable. And in our case, we're leveraging what the PathCheck Foundation has proposed in terms of paper-first verifiable credentials to be able to encode within the QR code all the details that you would need. The QR code itself contains all the information needed to verify. There's no internet connection required other than to be able to load the app, but the data is not passed back and forth. So you basically have in that QR code is encoded a digital signature, the address for the key used to sign that data, and the data itself that's contained within the certificate. And it matches what's on the paper certificate. So to verify against the data against the signature, you take the underlying data, you check it against the key and confirm that it matches the actual digital signature that's encoded within it. So this allows us to embed them directly alongside the traditional paper certificates that allows it to be verifiable, it's digitally signed by government, it contains the same details as paper. There's no centralized verification required. It doesn't require data to be stored and transmitted to centralized servers. Everything's included in the QR code itself. You just need to actually have an app that you can verify it with. So these certificates, they're really great for international travel. But what about other contexts? So for local use, what about privacy and choice? Are these certificates the best fit? There's a lot of sensitive information contained within them that kind of goes beyond the real need of just verifying kind of low risk situations. So what we need is a form of key that enables privacy and choice. It's something that would contain just some of the details of the broader certificate, but is greatly simplified just to mitigate the risks for local scenarios without disclosing all of your information. And this would be one that anyone could be issued. It could be an individual with a recent negative PCR test. It could be an individual who's fully vaccinated, or an individual who has a medical exemption. And it allows us to provide access to activities that may otherwise be restricted in cases where we have local community spread, such as indoor dining, if we want to relax that a little bit, or large higher risk events. How do we mitigate that at a time when we could end up with a super spreader outbreak, or other activities like tourism activities? So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Bermuda's COVID Safe Key program. So for the Safe Key, we want to use the same QR code verification method that is used for the certificate, but this time make it minimally identifiable. So we still have a digital signature, we're still using an address to sign the data, and you have the underlying data within it that can be used to verify against the signature. However, unlike the certificate, the key itself is minimally identifiable. The data is very limited. So you really only have a person's initials, an expiry date, and their birth month and day. And the premise being you compare this against a secondary form of ID, a passport or driver's license, that allows this data to be confirmed, but it's very difficult to actually uniquely identify and track someone with this kind of minimally identifiable data. It also doesn't tell you what a person's COVID status actually is, whether or not they have a negative test or a vaccine, which helps preserve privacy. You really get to choose when you disclose this information and how you disclose it. And then the pass expiry dates themselves can be based upon the risk and can even be modified a little bit. So it could be a recent PCR test has 3 days expiry, but that may be reduced for a large event like Bermuda's Cup match. Similarly, a fully vaccinated individual might have a 3-month expiry or longer, depending on the requirements around booster shots or other kinds of considerations. And you may set a custom expiry for specific medical exemptions. This then allows us to really tailor the two solutions that we have to different scenarios. So when you're looking at high-risk scenarios like international travel, when you really need to prove to another jurisdiction that you're you and you need to provide a lot of personally identifiable information and the full details of your COVID status, whether it's a negative test or a vaccine, you can do so. But then in the case of lower risk scenarios, there's less of a need for that sensitive information to be shared. So we can really focus on it being minimally identifiable, leveraging a secondary form of ID and putting an expiry around the status to kind of govern how and when it's able to be used. This then allows us to issue certificates and safe keys for each type of status so that you really get a full certificate when you need to be able to demonstrate the full details, and you get a safe key for those scenarios where you don't need to disclose all that information. This model for verifiable credentials has been built on an open standard. So it's built using the paper-first verifiable credential standard proposed by the MIT's PathCheck Foundation. And that means that it's more of an open standard and an open specification that anyone can create apps to manage and verify certificates and safe keys issued as part of this. So this allows us to really issue certificates and safe keys to reopen the economy and re-enable some of these different scenarios that we had that may be restricted in times of community spread or other kinds of considerations, such as international travel in this age of COVID. So with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to view this video introducing COVID certificates and the Safe Key program, and look forward to working with you as we roll it out and pilot it locally on island and hopefully get around some of the pain points that COVID-19 has introduced. So thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.